The U.S. serial killers you've never heard of. Henry Lee Moore, 25 murders from 1911 to 1912 across Iowa, Kansas, Illinois, and Colorado. Then there's the unsolved Jack the Ripper-style murders in Atlanta during the same period. From May 20th to July 1st, 1911, he killed one person almost at the same time every Saturday night. But the killer that really stands out from the past is the Axe Murderer, who killed dozens of people in Texas and Louisiana from January 1911 to April 1912. This gruesome story is the stuff of horror movies. In terms of American serial killers, you could call him the worst of the worst, before serial killers were ever actually discussed in everyday society. In 1911, this killer entered a house in Rayne, Louisiana, and he left 4 family members dead. The murder weapon was an axe, although he used the dull side of it when he stuck his victims. Not long after, just 10 miles away in the small town of Crowley, he walked into the Byers family home and killed 3 people much the same way. 2 weeks after that, he headed over to the city of Lafayette in Louisiana. He opened the door to a family home and went on a bloody rampage, killing all 4 family members. He decided to go to Texas next, where a couple of months later he killed a family of 5 in their home. 6 months later, he was back in Lafayette. Again, he skulked around a family home at night, waiting for the right time to pounce. He entered the home and struck with his axe with furious anger against 6 people who before that had never dreamed such a monster could exist. He didn't wait long for his next bloodbath. He killed a family of 5 in Lake Charles, Louisiana. He left a note after that one. When he maketh the inquisition for blood, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble, human 5. This maniac killed 49 people in all. What's even more shocking is he committed so many murders in such a short period. If that happened today, there wouldn't be a person in the world who owned a smartphone or TV that didn't hear about it. Back then, hardly anyone knew about the Axe Murderer, the killer of innocent families. We're pretty sure you've never heard of him, so now it's time to investigate some more. There's been a fairly recent book written about this killer called Axes of Evil, the true story of the Axeman murders. This book is correct in saying that those murders are still today the worst instance of serial killing in the US for which no one has been found guilty. Here's the blurb from the book. It's a tale of ritual murder, voodoo mayhem, and wholesale killings that leads the reader on a shocking train ride across 2 states and into the chapters of a real American horror story. The fiendish slayings of 10 sleeping families nestled in their beds. That's no exaggeration. And it's not an exaggeration to say the unsolved crime is comparable to the crimes of one serial killer you all know, Jack the Ripper. In fact, what the Ripper did was nothing compared to what the Axe Murderer did in terms of body count. But how he got away with it is just as confounding. As for why you've never heard of these murders, they just didn't fall on enough editors' desks. According to Vronsky, the small Texas and Louisiana towns where the murders took place were kinds of outbacks back then, while London during the time of Jack the Ripper was the center of the world, especially when it came to the newspaper industry. First of all, why so many axe murderers and not so many knife or gun murders? The simple answer is axes were used a lot back in those days. They were just the weapon of choice for a lot of people since they were always close by. As the Smithsonian magazine points out, almost every family in rural districts owned such an implement and often left it lying in their yard. The same article said that most axe murder victims were killed in their beds. Axes aren't so useful when a person can see what's coming, but they're ideal when the victim is stationary. Some people called this span of crimes the mulatto axe murders because the victims were all usually mixed race. The scant reports we can find say the first murders in Louisiana all happened when the families were fast asleep, usually in the early morning hours. The first slaying in Texas happened on March 22, 1911, in the city of San Antonio. The victims were the entire Cassaway family who lived in a house on Olive Street. The father of the family was Lewis, an African-American man who worked at the Grant School. When he didn't show up for work that day, someone went around to his house to see why. That's when all 5 family members were found. In one room, police found Lewis and his daughter. In another room was everyone else, including his wife, who also, according to reports, was white. She was reportedly in the worst state when police discovered the awful scene. This has led to some people to believe the killer not only held some racist belief that black and white people shouldn't have families together, but he mainly blamed the women of mixed-race families. There was certainly a motive which pointed to intense hatred. The killer stole nothing from the house, even though he could have. According to one writer, nothing in the house was disturbed, and Lewis's trousers were still hanging from the bedpost with several dollars in the pocket. The same author said the family had no known enemies in the town and got along with everyone. The killer then returned to Louisiana, where he killed all 6 members of the Norbert Randall family. As he'd done in the past, he used the blunt side of the axe rather than the sharp side, hitting his victims with such force that they died from head injuries. Yet again, the father of the family was an African American and the mother was white. Someone was actually arrested for this. That's something we want to come back to later. While this person was in custody, more murders took place, and again they involved mixed-race families. They also involved an axe, so it was hard not to connect the murders with the previous ones. For instance, in Crowley, the killer used an axe to kill a white woman and her 3 mixed-race offspring. Crowley's Daily Signal newspaper wrote this on January 22, 1912. In every Negro house in Crowley, lights are kept burning all night, and adult family members remain awake during the night. The same newspaper wrote, "Many believe that religious mania is responsible for the killings. Negro servants in Crowley are in a panic. The more superstitious believe that some supernatural agency is at work." Just so you know, we are aware this word can be construed as offensive and anachronistic, but using the actual language that was written serves a purpose here. The family that was killed in Lake Charles was also of mixed race. They were the Felix Prasad family, whose address was 331 Rock Street in North Lake Charles. They lived in a small house close to the Southern Pacific Line. This was one murder with a clue because, as you know, the murderer left that note behind. "When he maketh the inquisition for blood, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble." It comes from the Bible, Psalm 9:12. The New King James Version goes like this: "When he avenges blood, he remembers them. He does not forget the cry of the humble." Next to the note were the words human and 5. There were also the words pearl art or ort, which were written below everything else. People actually started talking about some crazy cult that called itself the Human 5. According to Christian scholars, this part of the Bible means people should not pursue revenge themselves, but let the Lord settle all scores on behalf of the humble. What's also strange is that the victim decorated the fingers of all the younger victims. He used paper tied with a pin and put each piece between the victim's fingers. The killer had also placed a bucket below the bodies to catch the dripping blood, which was another reason local people thought they had a killer cult on their hands. In February 1912, the killer struck again, this time in Beaumont, Texas. He killed a mixed-race woman and her 3 offspring. Just over a month later, he killed a woman and her 4 kids, as well as a man who was staying over at her house. The police had previously tried to link the murders with religious fanaticism, and of course noted the fact that many of the victims were of mixed race or were all African American. One news report we found said this about the killer in its conclusion: "In all probability, they have been perpetuated by the same person who no doubt is insane or affected with some fiendish mania against the Negro race." Police now understood that most of the murders took place close to the Southern Pacific Railroad line, so they came to the conclusion that the killer rode the train, got off, killed, and got back on. Hopping trains back in those days wasn't anything out of the ordinary. At this time, they were thinking there was only one killer, but the possibility of there being more than one didn't escape their minds. There were some other clues too, which many decades in the future would have stirred the minds of criminal profilers. In the first Lafayette murders, the bodies had been what profilers call posed. All the victims had been placed on their knees as if praying. The killer had put the wife's arm over her husband's shoulder, and the younger family members were in front of them. The sheriff at the time, Mr. Lacoste, first believed the murders could have been the work of an escaped lunatic. That guy was arrested, but soon released and returned to the asylum. The sheriff said he had several people he wanted to speak with, but so far things didn't look good. A story in the Lafayette Advertiser said since so many murders were looking like the same person had done them, a terrible monster was on the loose. Later in 1912, the killer struck twice in Texas. First, he killed William Burton and 4 members of his family while they were asleep in their San Antonio home. Just 2 nights later, the killer struck in Hempstead, Texas, killing 3 family members. African Americans and mixed-race families were understandably panic-stricken. People took to arming themselves and staying up all night long. Neighbors took turns guarding each other's homes. A man named Ernest Smothers was guarding his home one night when he heard a noise at the door. He shot a man dead. Only that man was a well-meaning neighbor who'd just come to check in on him. After Smothers shot the man, a guy named Max Warren went to see what happened. When he saw the body of a dead man lying on the floor, he ran away. As he was running, someone shouted that he was the Axeman. Warren was shot after that by another person who was close by. We can't find the original news report describing this neighborly chaos, although podcasts and blogs have talked about it. The craziness does ring true when you look at one news story from back then. We found an article in the Lafayette Advisor dated August 20th, 1912. The headline reads, "Axeman Again." The first paragraph reads, The dreaded Axeman, who is believed to be implicated in the murder of over 40 Negroes in Louisiana and Texas, has been foiled at last, but not caught. The article explains that the killer went to a house owned by a man named James Dashiell, described in the story as mulatto. It says the killer had tried once before to kill this man and his family but had not succeeded. On his second attempt, he crept into the house through the kitchen window. He saw Mrs. Dashiell asleep and struck her with his axe, missing her head but almost severing her arm. She screamed and kicked out, only to be struck again on the leg. Her screams woke up her husband, who armed himself and fired on the person. The story goes on to say 2 families of 5 each, nearly white, have been murdered with axes in the last 18 months. Since the murders were so similar to others farther afield, the newspaper said they might be connected to a roving gang. The story ended by saying, "Negroes here are greatly aroused and many are purchasing pistols and guns, and it's said that the night vigils will be kept." It seems this last attack was the Axeman's last. Like his other murders, it left police scratching their heads. It left the public, especially African American and mixed-race families, fearing for their lives and living in a climate of constant fear. We told you the police had a suspect for one of the attacks previously. It wasn't actually a he, but a she. Her name was Clementine Barnabette. She was just 19 years old. She was the daughter of Raymond Barnabette, who himself had been accused of being the killer. He was arrested and let go, and then rearrested for the killing of the Randall family, although the evidence against him was not very substantial. His daughter Clementine had told the police her father was the killer. Her brother had said the same. Still, while Raymond was in jail, the murders kept happening. When the other Lafayette family was murdered, it obviously couldn't have been him. The suspicion fell on Clementine, who lived just a few blocks away from where the murders had taken place. Police also found blood and parts of brain on her clothes. Dr. Metz in New Orleans said the body matter matched that of the murdered family, but back then, it was hard to say that conclusively. In one news report, it just says the doctor said the blood was not menstrual. During questioning, Clementine admitted to killing that family. She said the murders were to show her devotion to the high priestess of the Church of the Sacrifice. She, like others in this church, apparently believed that human sacrifice could bring riches and even immortality. Clementine also said the high priestess had given her some conjure bags, kind of good luck charms, that would help her get away with murder. She also said this in her statement to the police. One of the gang was instructed to go to New Iberia and interview the Hoodoo Man, who said we were safe in any and all actions which we might do. Our lives would at all times be fully protected by the power of the hoodoos. It all sounds very strange and gruesome, but could a young woman have done all those murders by herself? Human Rights Watch has written about the Axe murders and believes it was indeed the same person or people who were responsible for the 49 murders comprising various families. Clementine was arrested, as were Edwin Charles and Gregory Porter, 2 men that had been with her on the night of the last Lafayette murders. But then a guy named King Harris was also arrested. He was said to be the leader of the Church of Sacrifice, which had members in Crowley and Lafayette and Lake Charles. After his arrest, police found this passage underlined in the Bible. "And now also the axe is laid unto the root of the trees. Every tree, therefore, which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire." Matthew 3:10. Here's what one newspaper story wrote about him. It is known that on the night of the murder, this Harris held a meeting in a house about 1/2 block from the Randall home, and Randall and his family are said to have been at the meeting. It's since been theorized that if this guy had anything to do with the murders, the reason he had that bit underlined was that he believed it meant that trees that bring bad fruit were equal to mixed-race families. That's why they were killed. Still, not all the murders were of mixed-race families. News reports called him the Negro Preacher, who was head of the church, but investigations into him led to nothing. Some people even questioned if the church existed at all. Other people were arrested, some linked to those strange churches and others to the practice of hoodoo. Then everything went crazy again because, as you know, while Clementine and her father were in jail, more axe murders happened. So there's just no way that Clementine could have been behind all 49 murders. She told police she had committed 17 of them, although she said she had 4 accomplices, 2 men and 2 women, who she wouldn't name. She said they drew straws as to who was the one who struck with the axe, the others just watched. In her own words, she said to the police about one attack, "We took the man and woman, placed them in a kneeling position beside the bed and left the house. I was one of the first to aid the relatives the next day and help prepare the bodies for burial." She also said these families were not selected particularly. "We started out not knowing who the victims would be." Still, investigators wrote that she was very self-contradictory. So at times, she said one thing and then later said another thing. Sometimes she just told outright lies. It was as if she was making the whole thing up, and she seemed to be enjoying it. Sheriff Lacoste did not think she was innocent, saying Clementine Barnabette is rational, and I believe it is true, except as to details given with the purpose of confusing officers as to her accomplices. She was eventually convicted of one murder, Mrs. Randall, and sentenced to life in prison, although after having some kind of surgical operation it was said she was cured of her ills. It's not known what operation was performed on her, but the prison said it restored her to a normal condition. She was released after 10 years, and no one knows what happened to her after that. Today, people doubt whether she committed any of the murders. Maybe she did commit the one murder. As for the ones that happened while she was behind bars, perhaps she was part of the sacrifice sect, and various other members committed other killings. After researching this story, we can say with certainty that we are certainly uncertain about who did what. The local newspapers thought it was her, with one writing, "While the woman at times seems practically insane, she yet has a certain intelligence and cunning. Ever since her incarceration, she has successfully foiled the officers in their attempts to get at the true facts of the case. And when she deceives the officers by giving them some false clue, she smiles with devilish delight and chuckles over her victory. We will never know the answer. Perhaps there was a general hysteria around the time, and perhaps there were copycats. In 1909, a family was murdered by a person wielding an axe. That murder also happened in Crowley. In 1911, right after Clementine went to prison and vowed for more murders to happen while the moon was full, William Walmsley and his loving wife Sally and their daughter were all killed in Philadelphia, Mississippi. In 1912, 8 family members were brutally slain in what became known as the Villisca Axe murders in Iowa. A few years later came the Axeman of New Orleans, who was never caught. Now you need to watch this serial killer with more victims than any other killer in American history, or learn more about these crazed people and how serial killer profiles actually catch serial killers.